That's always terrifying.
Mhm. Just like launching into space or something.
Exactly. Then behind the scenes, I have to click some things to get us onto the Facebook Live. So that's always this delay here. The Zoom has gotten smarter where I don't need to type in like what our event is. So yay, Zoom, you did it.
There are a lot of improvements, yeah.
Hi, everyone. We'll officially get going in just a moment. We're getting our Facebook live stream set up here. And it looks like we're live in all the places. Awesome. So before we begin, I'm just going to share a little bit about the Fox Cities Book Festival. And then we're going to dive into our event for the evening. And thank you so much for being here on our first day of the Fox Cities Book Festival. As I said, for coming, my name's Aubrey. I'm the president of the Fox Cities as of this year. And then I also, my computer's getting angry at me. No support, I don't want you. And then I'm also the representative with the Little Chute Library end of things for the book festival. This is our 14th year doing the book festival, so yay. This is our second year online, but we hope to see you in person in 2022. So we definitely work together with a lot of different partners. We have schools, we have libraries, we have grants that we receive, and just organizations that we work with. So thank you to everyone who makes the book festival possible. A big part of the Fox Cities Book Festival is we exist to connect writers and readers, and we want that to be without barriers so that everyone can join. So making that possible, we exist on donations, volunteers, and so shout out to the people who have donated, people in businesses, community members, everyone who makes it possible. And while we're keeping track specifically here of the financial contributions, we'd also like to thank the volunteers and community members who invest their time too. Thank you to everyone who makes the book festival possible. If you would like to support the book festival financially, you can donate online. You can go to foxcitiesbookfestival.org or Facebook/Fox Cities Book Festival. You can mail a check. There's a QR code with the fun dino there. You can scan that to bring you to our donation page, or you can always ask for more information. So if you are also looking to get involved with the book festival, if you'd like to donate your time as a volunteer or perhaps even as a board member, we would love to hear more from you. So that's where that email, info@foxcitiesbookfestival.org is excellent. So for all of our events, we do have a code of conduct and statement of responsibilities. I'm going to give you a moment to just really look at that. But what it boils down to is we are not going to let there be any disrespect at any of our events. We need these events to be a safe place for everyone, and we will ensure that. So if there is any disrespectful actions or comments, we do reserve the right to take you out of the event. We do have that feature in the online world. But now it's the moment we've been waiting for. We have Nick Shire here with us, and I'm going to stop my sharing here, but a little bit about Nick and also Heartbrain. So Heartbrain is a series of writing workshops and trainings focused on storytelling and building communities. Nick Shire is the director of Heartbrain, who was raised on the smells of cheese factory labor and tobacco and the taste of mulberries, American cheese, ramen, and half-colonized fry bread. After that, they grew up mostly in trailer parks and campgrounds. At the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, they earned their BA in English with minors in social justice and creative writing, and interned at the LGBTQ Resource Center and found out they were dyslexic. Shortly after, they earned their MFAW from Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont. They focused on creative nonfiction. Mostly they studied storytelling as a route to social justice. Nick resides in the Fox Cities, where they live with Lucas, Monster, Boogeyman, and perhaps some wicked looking spiders. They have experience as the ED of a nonprofit organization, waiting tables, teaching in higher education, customer service, editing, writing, and some other things. So really, Nick knows all the things, lots of all the things. Heartbrain is their favorite dream, built by the magic of relationships, rooting to community, some amazing weird instructions, and students, and a lot of books. And Nick has also helped us with the book festival for both events and behind the scenes. So thank you so much to Nick for being here. I am going to pass it on to Nick now. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Aubrey. I'm not going to claim to know all things or even most of all of the things, but I think that Aubrey knows many of the things. So she has agreed to help navigate the chat. So if you want to participate, you're not comfortable unmuting yourself to talk, go ahead and put your comments, your questions in the chat, either on Facebook or in the Zoom. I'm really happy to be here with you all. I'm really excited to be talking about comic books, but I'm going to stop talking for 1 second while I navigate this technology and try to share my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen well?
We see it.
Awesome. So comic books are really exciting to me for a lot of reasons. I think it's a really brilliant genre, and some of my very favorite books are comic books. Some of my other favorite books are graphic novels, and it's okay if you're like graphic novels and comic books are not the same thing. I totally understand they are not, but they are similar to each other in ways. But one reason that it's really special to me to engage in comic books is because I did not know anything about comic books until my son, Lucas, was really into comic books. And so through helping to support his reading and writing and drawing adventures, I really was welcomed into this huge new world and this new genre that I'm absolutely in love with. And I'm happy to see so many comic book fans joining us. If you don't know a lot about comic books, that's okay. That's what we're here to talk about. So today we're going to do some introductions, just get to know each other a little bit, talk about what makes comic books. Why are they different than other books? Why are they different than comics? Why are they different than books? What does it mean? We'll get into the 3-act story structure, specifically the 4-panel version for comic books and sequential art, and see how do comic books build story. And then we'll have some time at the end for creation time. We'll make our own comic books. Don't worry, you don't have to share it if you want to. I hope you will. And I hope you will, even if you're not really comfortable drawing, because that's absolutely okay. We're just trying to convey story. So for introductions, I'll ask you to put in the chat your name, your pronouns, just so we can all refer to you respectfully the way you want to be referred to without making assumptions about you. So your pronouns might be he, him, his, they might be she, her, hers, they might be they, them, theirs, they might fall outside of that range and be something else. They might be a couple of those. Just let us know how you want us to refer to you. And then I'm going to ask you to share who is your favorite fictional villain, not real life villains, they have to be fictional villains, and why. And so I'll go first. My name again is Nick Shire. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I'd have to say that my favorite fictional villain is Mr. Freeze from Batman in the DC universe. And that's because the first way that I was introduced to Mr. Freeze outside of the world of film in a book was a children's book, an easy reader children's book. And the story of Mr. Freeze was this story of just this really misunderstood guy who really loved his partner, and his partner was sick, and he just really was trying to find alternative medical solutions to save her. And so it gave me a different perspective of both villains and the different ways that we tell stories to different audiences. And so Mr. Freeze will always hold a special place in my heart. What about other folks? Who is your favorite fictional villain?
While we wait to hear more from our attendees, I will say my name is Aubrey, my pronouns she, her, hers, And then my favorite fictional villain, I feel like I'm almost like copying you, Nick, a little bit, but I have a weakness for the Joker from Batman because there's so many different variations of the story, and there's so many different ways that the Joker has been interpreted. And I think that it's just fascinating, the different adaptations that you can find.
The Joker is a fantastic villain and one that we all know about, I think.
That's true.
Just going to leave a little bit of time if folks want to get adjusted and are feeling like sharing, and if not, we'll move on to the next slide real soon. Please feel welcome to share at any time. If you're joining us after we get started, feel free to share then. So the question is, what is comic book writing? And what is a comic book even? If we're here to talk about comic books and comic book writing, that is a separate thing from just writing, right? Or just book writing. So a comic book is something that is published in a serial in incomplete versions. So when a comic book comes out, it is absolutely incomplete. You know that the story is not over, or that the story did not begin within that book. So it's the very last issue of a comic that's been being published, and you know that it's the end of the story. Though in comic books, people can come back to life and stories can be rewritten and time changes. But even if you know it's the very end of a story, you know that that comic book doesn't contain the beginning of the story. And so some other things that folks ask about, like how is comic book different than a graphic novel? A graphic novel tends to contain an entire story. So it has images to help tell the story. And there's a relationship between the images and the words, and the narration and the dialogue all appear similar in comic books and graphic novels. But a graphic novel, even if it's part of a larger story, tends to contain a whole story from beginning to end within it. And then other folks will ask, okay, what's the difference between a trade and a graphic novel then? And a trade is really just a compiled book of previously published comic books. So it reads like a graphic novel where it might contain more of a whole story, but it's not a new story. It is comic books that have been published individually before, and now folks want to read the whole story. And so it's being published as a whole book that you can read from beginning to end. And what is comic book writing? Comic book writing is really a particular kind of writing where you're really writing in a way where you can't just write the story, you can't just write the dialogue, you can't just write the narration, but you have to consider how images are going to pair with your writing to tell the whole story. So sometimes we're lucky enough to be multi-talented and we can both write and draw, or in the world of digital media, we can use resources where we don't have to draw, but we can use images online to make sequential art and write the entire story. And so we are seeing the ways that words and images come together, and we're playing with those ourselves, and we have complete control over creating this universe. But oftentimes folks who are writing comic books, they're writing a script and it is being then sent to somebody who's going to draw what they're writing. And they're not drawing it in a way where the drawing is going to tell the story all by itself. They're bringing the writing into that. And so the writing really needs to contain clues into what happens next. So there might be notes that the reader never sees that tells exactly what the drawing should happen or what the context is. But also the writing contains more information than it might need to in other contexts to make sure that we're moving through it well and the artist can see what the writer's seeing and can portray that. Not only what is happening, but the mood of the piece. If other folks want to add definitions to comic book writing in the chat, that would be awesome. I think comic books mean a lot of different things to different people, and folks are very passionate about comic books. So I'd be happy to hear what you would like to add to that definition of comic books. So one really important component of any story is the 3-act story structure. This isn't true in every culture, but it is true in many cultures, and many types of storytelling contain this, even if it changes a little bit. So we have the context, what's happening, we have the goals, we have the conflict, and then we have the resolution. So Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And that's a little bit confusing when we see 4 panels because we have 4 panels and 3 acts. So what is really happening here is the context is all Act 1. So the what, the where, the when, the how, the why. And then we have the goal of the characters or the character or maybe a plot point here. And then we move into the conflict. The goals and the conflict are Act 2. So those are contained in the same act. And then the resolution is Act 3 all on its own. And the images here are from Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art by Scott McCloud. It's a fantastic resource if you're interested in reading comics or writing comics. So that same 3-act story arc that we're talking about, often we see it also like this. So we have the context here, and then we have our goals rising up, and then we have what we call the peak or the climax, and then we have this conflict here that brings us down, and then our resolution. It's the exact same thing, just a different image to explain it. So in Act 1, we have this image of Calvin here saying up, up, and away in a speech bubble. Calvin's running. You can see a little bit of shadow underneath Calvin. So maybe Calvin's above the ground. And then there's this flowing piece of cloth off of the back of Calvin. And they're saying Act 1 is 5 W's. So what does that mean? The 5 W's are the who, what, when, where, and why. And also how. It's not a W, but we often talk about how when we're talking about the who, what, when, where, and why. So that is what we're talking about when we talk about the context. The context is just what's going on, who is there, when's it happening, where's it happening, why is it happening, and sometimes and often, how is it happening? So let me go back to Calvin. So we've moved from the context here to the goal. And so Calvin is, there's no words here, and Calvin is reaching toward the sky. There's much more space between Calvin's body and the ground and a shadow. And then we have this flowing cloth. And the premise tells us that Calvin plays Superman. So we have the who, Calvin, Calvin's running, Calvin's saying up, up, and away. And then our goal is Calvin wants to play or be Superman. The next panel, Calvin falls to the ground. There's a crash. You can see these lines coming from his body to indicate impact. There's some debris up here by this flowing piece of cloth or cape. And there's a big whoomph. It's not in a speech bubble, so it's a sound that's happening outside of voice. And Calvin has hit the ground and there's a thud. So we have our context, we have our goal to be Superman, and we have our conflict, which is gravity, or the fact that Calvin cannot fly. And then we have our final panel where in a speech bubble, Calvin is on the ground. He looks distressed. His mouth is hanging out. His mouth is wide and his eyes are wide. And he's saying, ah, kryptonite, kryptonite. So this is the resolution, Calvin's reaction to what happened. And the resolution could be an acknowledgement that Calvin can't fly, but because Calvin's in character, he's saying that kryptonite is the reason that he's unable to fly because he is being Superman. So context, Calvin wants to be Superman. Goal, Calvin wants to fly or play out flying. Conflict, Calvin cannot fly and gravity exists. Resolution, Calvin's going to blame his struggles on kryptonite. So just a reminder, Act 1, context. Act 2, goals and conflict. Act 3, resolution. Any questions before we move forward into some examples? Please feel invited to keep asking them as we move forward. So now we'll look at a simple story with no sequential art. So it could be the same kind of story that we just looked at, just 4 panels, but there's going to be no sequential art to tell the story. So here's our story. Taking a selfie. Now let's see how this looks. How? It's not much of a story, right? Like I'm not envisioning what's happening. I don't really know what's going on. I'm not sure if this is what they mean, like what the storyteller means to be communicating with me. It doesn't mean a lot to me. I know what a selfie is. I know what looking at a selfie to see how it turned out is. I know what how means, but it's not really creating a picture in my mind, and I'm not learning a lesson or engaging with it. So if we look at it with some sequential art, we'll see that the story changes. So we have the same exact story, taking a selfie, and we see a person holding a phone in front of their face, and we know what is happening, right? This person is taking a picture of themselves. Then we move to the next panel where the person is saying, now let's see how this looks. So we know that they're looking at the selfie, right? We know what's happening. They've moved from their arm outstretched, they're holding the phone in the way that you would when you're taking a picture. Now they've brought it into themselves, they're holding it with 2 hands, they're not smiling anymore to pose for the picture, they're contemplating, looking at it. And so the sequence has changed. And then we get to the final bit of the story, which was the most confusing piece to me without the sequential art, and that was how, this question here. Well, now we know that makes a lot of sense, right? Like if this person is taking a picture of themselves and they've changed from smiling for a pose to just kind of contemplative, how did they end up having 4 eyes and 1 jagged tooth hanging out? Like, how did that happen to them? We can see the whole story because the art's paired with the words. So the question here is, was there a step missing in this example? And feel free to put your answer in the chat if you're comfortable and want to. And we'll pause here for a second. But so we've learned that we have context, we have goals, we have context, we have goals, we have conflict, and then we have resolution. And that happens in 4 panels generally. But we only have 3 panels here. So do we have all 4 of the steps? So we have taking a selfie, that's the context, right? We have, now let's see how this looks, that's the goal. And then we have how it looks. And that might be where we're having conflict. But it doesn't really appear that there's a resolution. We don't see the person with a selfie that they're happy about. We don't assume that this was the selfie that they were trying to get. So we don't have the resolution here. In the next example, there's going to be 5 panels. And so the question is there an added step because there are 5 panels? If we know that comic books use the 3-story arc in 4 panels generally to tell a story and to propel a story forward, what does it mean if there's 5 panels? So we don't have words here, we just have the sequential art. And we see that this being is here changing into this being, and then completely transformed. So sometimes a story is drawn out. So sometimes we might use 2 or more, we might use many panels to draw out the same act in a story and move it along. It doesn't always have to be 4 panels. And the question here is, in the next example, which is more impactful, the dialogue, the sequential art, or the combination of the 2? And I edited this a little bit. I had a word that I wasn't comfortable using, but so this is the only word I edited, and it was just a different word in place of humans. So we have this polar bear here on this, looks like a chef's hat of snow in the water. And the polar bear is saying, what more? And then we see the polar bear struggling to hang on. The little chef's cap of snow has changed. It's much smaller. The polar bear is saying, "Must I do?" And then we move into this next phase in the sequential art where the polar bear is only able to be on the snow with 2 paws because it shrunk a lot. And it says "to convince." And then the final panel, the polar bear is unable to be on the snow anymore because it's entirely melted. And it's hanging actually outside of the panel here, hanging on. And the question is, "You humans. So what more must I do to convince you humans?" Is the story being told through art, through dialogue, or the combination of two? And I think the answer for me is that it's definitely the combination, but I think the story can be told with just the art this time. So we have a polar bear on this melting snow. We have the context of understanding what this is about, that this is happening in the world. And then so we see the polar bear moving through the sequential art, and I can get the whole story as far as the snow melting and the polar bear struggling. But what is added through the dialogue is who's responsible or what the polar bear needs somebody to do. And that's really looking to the humans, right? So the story can be told by just the art alone. I don't think the story can be told just from the text, because if I said to you, "What more must I do to convince you humans?" I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what the context is. But pairing it together, a more full story is being told. So now we're going to look at an issue of Spider-Man, and we're going to talk about how this works in comic books. So we have our context here, we have our goal here, we have our conflict here, and we have our resolution. So we'll look at it a little bit more closely. So we have a young child lifting up a car to get a ball, and 2 adults running toward them saying, "Annie, no." And up here we have this like spider box. So it's sort of a narration. It's sort of dialogue. And sometimes when we have text box that look like this in comic books, it's actually the internal thoughts of the speaker. It's not something they're saying out loud, it's just what they're thinking. So we have, "My name is Annie May Parker. I'm daughter of Spider-Man. But for the first few years of my life, I thought my middle name was," and then we have Annie No. So she thinks her middle name is No, right? So this is the context. This is what's happening. She's lifting the car and they don't want her to be. And she hears no so often that it might as well be her middle name. And then we have the goal, because whenever I did what just came naturally, and then she's saying, "Hey there, little fella," she's looking at a spider here. So the goal is to just do whatever comes naturally, right? She hears Annie no. And then we see that the conflict is that she is sideways on a building, several stories up, and gravity exists, as we learned from Calvin's story, right? And then the resolution is her inside safely. There are rules to keep her safe. And then just like this acknowledgement that it bothered her parents, it drove her parents crazy. But whether or not she's at peace with what happened, the resolution is we see her move from being on the side of the building several stories up to being safe inside. So now we'll look at one issue of Hawkeye and talk a little bit about, okay, Nick, you've said that comic books tell stories with 3 acts in 4 panels, but I've seen many comic books and they don't just have 4 panels in them. That's not a full story. So we'll look a little bit closer so we can see the context, the goal, the conflict, and the resolution. So we have Hawkeye here by some train doors. We have somebody inside waving, the doors slam, right? So we're hearing this in the world because it's not in any kind of text box or quote bubble. And we hear Hawkeye say, "Come on, conductor, open the door." And then this person's like, "So long." So the context is trying to get on a train and not being able to. and chasing someone. And then we move into the goal. He says, I hate ditching Mockingbird, but I'm sure she'll have the brains to find me. Can't let this oddball character get away. So the goal is not letting this oddball character get away, who we haven't been introduced to yet. Then we move into, I need to move the zoom a little bit here so I can see the screen. So we move into what's happening next, which is the conflict. And we see Hawkeye leaping, and we see that he's thinking, better make this leap or I'm going to look like something the cat threw up. So the conflict there really is not making the train, right? Like the leap is a big leap and maybe he's not going to make it. And then the resolution, he lets us know it's resolution right away. We can see his hands firmly grabbing the thing he was reaching for to make sure he gets on the train. We can see his foot planted on the train, and he thinks did it. So we know for sure that it has been resolved. He's safe. And then he says, then he thinks, man, there's nothing like a good chase to make me feel great about myself again. Wonder if Oddball, so now we're introduced Oddball, would consent to be my regular sparring partner. So then we move into Cap's got the Red Skull, Iron Man has the Mandarin, me, I never had anybody on my own. Luck's with me, the door's unlocked. So we have a new context all of a sudden. So before we're chasing the train, that's our context, we're trying to get on the train, that becomes resolved. And then we move immediately into the next 3-act or 4-panel story, which is what's the new context and what's going to happen next. So that's how comic books tell their stories. It's not always in 4 panels. Sometimes it might be in 10 panels, it might be in 20 panels, it might be in some splashes, but it's really just moving through this context, having a goal, having the conflict, and then having the resolution. So these ones we're just going to look at a little bit more zoomed out. We're not going to look at them. This is an issue of Doom Patrol. And so we have the same 4-panel structure here, but we have this huge splash behind. And a splash is just something that art that exceeds a panel. So it's not in this nice little rectangle here. It's going all over the page. Sometimes a splash takes up an entire page, and sometimes a splash just fills up most of a page. But we still have the exact same 4-panel 3-act story arc here. So we have the context right here. We're finding out all of this information. We have the goal right here. We have the conflict, and then we have the resolution. And the same with this issue of Black Panther and the Agents of Wakanda. So we have the same 4 panels. It's doing the exact same kind of storytelling as the other ones, but it's not neatly in little rectangles next to each other. We have, this diagonal panel that's kind of behind this other panel here, and then we have this bigger panel here. So the biggest part of this, if this is our context and this is our goal, the biggest part here is our conflict. And then we have this zoomed in, really reflective resolution. We can only see her eyes, so we know that the resolution is happening internally and not out in the world. So now that we know a little bit about storyboarding and the 4-panel arc, we're going to talk about the benefits of storyboarding for other genres. So that's really useful if I want to write comic books, but what if I don't want to write comic books? How can this be meaningful in my life, in my writing life? So one, it's really useful for pre-writing. If you have an idea, but you don't really even know what kind of genre you want to make that idea into, or you know what genre you want to make it into, but you can't really see the full picture or where to start. Or sometimes we know where we want to start, but we want to start in the middle, or we want to start at the end. And it can be really difficult to do that without first painting the whole picture. So storyboarding can be really useful for that, making that 4-panel story arc. It's really good for structure and organization as you're building, so that you know what you're building as you go and you can see it. And it doesn't have to be filled with really fancy art. It could be stick figures or just notes. There are tons of online resources, free resources that you can use to use images, and you can alter the images a little bit online and create the art that way too. You don't have to rely on your drawing skills, though I think everyone could get a drawing book from the library. There's lots of great drawing books that help us all to be better artists. And it's actually quite easy if you just break down the steps. The other bit that it can be really helpful for is organizing a collection after it's been written. So we talked about using it in order to know what to write, know how to structure or organize something. But if you've already written something and now you need to compile it, like let's say an anthology of poetry, you have 20 poems, you know you're going to publish it in a book, but you don't know what order they should go in. You don't know how to make all of those 20 poems, those 20 individual stories, those 20 individual poems into a full anthology. Storyboarding is a great way to figure out which order those should go in. It helps in envisioning a complete project, which we talked about a little bit. It really helps in pitching an idea. So if you have an idea, especially if you've gotten feedback like the editor is really just not seeing your idea, a storyboard can be a really great way to share that idea or to just give a fresh pitch that has more than just words with it. And it's really useful in marketing and social media to make sure that little bits of your story are getting out into the world so that folks come back to whatever that larger story is, regardless of genre. So now it's time for us to create. We're going to work together to make a storyboard. We're each going to make them individually. And the goal here, again, is to tell a story that pairs sequential art with words. Those words can be narration. Here, they're outside of the box. They can be thought bubbles. They can be text bubbles. They can be sounds that we just hear in the world. So we're going to make 4-panel story. And you do not have to worry about the art being good. You just have to worry about the art telling a story. So a good way to think about this sequential art, if it's a little bit confusing still, is we always see these images where we see a full apple, right? We have this big, beautiful full apple. And then we see another image of an apple with one bite taken out of it. So now we don't see anybody, we just see a full apple and then we see a bite taken out of it. We know that somebody is eating that apple, right? And then we move into the next image, which is usually an apple core. That's all that's left of it. So with no words, with no people inside the frame of the panel, we've seen that this apple that was full has been eaten by somebody. So you're just trying to show movement in the story. So what we're going to do is take a piece of paper. If you have one, you can do this on the computer if you're using any software that also has images in it, like Canva. We're going to draw 4 panels, nothing fancy, just 4 squares on a piece of paper. Just something like this. And then we're going to decide what is the context, what are the goals, what's the conflict, what's the resolution. And then after that, after we have that figured out, what's my context, what's my goal, what's my conflict, what's my resolution, we're going to put each of those into one panel. So we're going to draw the sequential art. And then after we've drawn the sequential art, we're going to write in the narration or dialogue. And on the bottom here, there are some notes. If you're having trouble getting started, a good place to start would be try to consider your favorite comic book character and what would they do if they overslept. So now we have our context. Batman has overslept. Spider-Man has overslept. Or another place you might want to start, if you don't have a favorite comic book character, if you want to write a different story, is having the context, imagining what would your pet say if they could talk and how would that move? So we'll give everyone some time to work on that and then we'll check back in, make sure everyone's doing okay and see if anyone wants to share theirs. So I have my sequential art all drawn. I decided what my context, my goals, my conflict, and my resolution were. And now I'm going to go ahead and write some narration and some dialogue. If you're feeling like you know for sure you're going to want to share, can you just write yes or Y in the chat so we know that you're going to be ready to share? We're going to take just a couple of minutes to finish up working on our drawing or writing our words in, our narration or our dialogue. I want to say that I know some of us move really quickly and do this a lot, and some of us are still wondering what our context, our goals, and our conflict and resolution should be. And that's absolutely fine. If you want to work on it later, that's awesome. If you want to share it later, again, this is on Facebook Live, so it'll be really awesome to see your pictures in the chat later when you finish them. If that's this evening, or if that's this weekend or next month, it will be really cool to see what you've been working on. So we'll just give folks a few minutes to finish up, and then we'll see who wants to share. And I look forward to seeing your art. And by art, I obviously mean art and writing. I need to be clear about that in the context of comics, I think. Okay, let's see if anyone wants to share. I'm going to share mine in the hopes that you will see how great of a drawer I am, and you are feeling okay to be vulnerable and share yours with us as well. It's also really okay if nobody wants to share. It's a bit intimidating to just be on a virtual platform, but also to share when everyone can see it on Facebook Live. It's absolutely okay to choose not to share. So I'm going to hold it up here. Actually, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen here because I'm bad at mirrors, so then maybe I can see it a little bit better. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this well, but what I've got going on here, my context, is that this person who looks nothing like me, who is representing me, this stick figure, Nick, is sitting down at this table on the computer. And we see that Nick is thinking about comic book writing, trying to get ready, get on this virtual workshop that we're about to have. That's the context. And then we move over to what is the goal? Well, the goal is on the computer screen. That's the comic book writing workshop. We can see that the computer audio is saying Fox Cities Book Festival, and that's what's trying to happen here. And then as we move in to see what the conflict is, we can see my cat Monster, who is behind this computer screen, trying to reach over here, saying, meow, pay attention to me, meow. And so here's my conflict is I'm trying to be with you all and Monster wants attention right now. And so the resolution is we see this little cat arm coming out from behind a door and we see the text, human, meow, help, and a dirty sock. And Monster is locked in the bedroom, waiting for the workshop to get over, hoping that some human will come save them. Is anyone else interested in sharing theirs?
And if anyone's interested, you can raise your hand and we can make it where you can see. Until then, I can share mine. It's really small, so oh man, with this virtual background, I don't know if I can show it. Let's see. I suppose I can get rid of it until someone raises their hand. Okay, so we have a pet bunny at the library. So the bunny is like, I'm sick of eating pellets, sees a person with a carrot, oh, and then decides to follow the person. They're not fast enough. And so the bunny at the end says, next time.
I love it. Animals are the theme so far.
Yep.
I think because we've, maybe I'm projecting, but for me, it's because I feel like I've had practice drawing animals since youth. So I feel a little bit more confidence trying to make it happen.
I think for me too, like you said, there's like that little basic, you've been drawing them for a while, but then too, they're just so friendly and make you feel just a little happier as you draw them too. And
yeah, and they make stories more interesting. Okay, if no one else is interested in sharing theirs, that's absolutely fine. If you change your mind or if you're just not finished and you want to share it later, go ahead and send it to me via email or put it on the Facebook Live video in the chat. We would love to see those. Thank you so much for coming to learn about comic books. Thank you for being with us and drawing with us. I hope you have a fantastic evening.
And thank you to Nick for teaching us about comics and making them a bit more accessible to start working on. This is the first day of the Fox Cities Book Festival. So up next at 6 o'clock, we have the Story Catchers. Thanks again, Nick, and thanks to everyone for watching. I'm just putting in the chat here if you would like to donate to the Fox Cities Book Festival. That's that link again. But thank you so much for spending your hour with us.
Thank you.